My phone buzzed with a transaction declined alert at exactly 8:45 p.m. I was standing in the doorway of Romano's, rain dripping off my jacket, staring at my daughter Jessica, who was 20 feet away, trying to pay for what looked like a $400 dinner with my emergency credit card. I'm Harold Coleman, 58 years old, and I thought I knew my own daughter. That morning, Jessica had texted me, "Sorry, Dad, can't make dinner tonight." Something came up with Benjamin. Rain check? I've been looking forward to our Thursday dinner since my wife Mary passed 3 years ago. These weekly meals were about the only time I got to really talk with Jessica and see my 4-year-old grandson. But there she was at the best table by the window, clearly not dealing with any child emergency. She was laughing and raising a champagne glass with Kevin's parents, looking like she was hosting some kind of celebration. Kevin was cutting into what appeared to be a prime ribeye, and his mother Nancy was showing Jessica something on her phone while they both giggled like schoolgirls. The hostess, a young woman with a bright smile, approached me. "Good evening, sir. Table for one? Actually, I need to speak with Tony Rivera." "Tell him Hank Coleman is here." Tony and I went back 15 years to when I'd wired this place during their major renovation. Good man, always been straight with me. He appeared from behind the bar, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Hank, what brings you in on a Thursday night?" I nodded toward Jessica's table, keeping my voice low. "Tony, that's my daughter over there, and unless I'm seeing things wrong, she's been using my credit card here without my knowledge." His expression shifted from friendly to concerned. "Let's talk in my office." We walked past the kitchen, the familiar smell of garlic and wine thick in the air. Tony's office was cramped but organized, with receipts and schedules covering a corkboard behind his desk. "How bad is it?" I asked, settling into the worn chair across from him. He pulled out a manila folder, hesitating for a moment. "Hank, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but they've been regulars here for the past 10 weeks. Always requesting the premium table, always ordering the most expensive items we have." My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step on a ladder. "Give me numbers, Tony." He opened the folder and pulled out a calculator. "Total charges to your card over the last 10 weeks, $4,127. I sat back in that chair feeling like someone had hit me with a $2,000 for $4,000. That was more than I'd spent on myself in 8 months. "Tony, I'm going to need copies of every single receipt." "Are you sure about this? Family business can get messy." "Dead sure." "And Tony, can you freeze any future charges to that card?" He checked his computer. "When do you want it effective?" I looked at my watch. 8:30 p.m. Through the office window, I could see Stephen, their waiter, approaching their table with what looked like a dessert menu. 8:45 p.m. sharp, I said, "Consider it done." I walked back into the dining room and found a corner table where I had a clear view of their party. Jessica was animated, telling some story that had Kevin's father, Carl, chuckling. She was wearing a silk blouse I'd never seen before, and when she gestured, I caught the flash of what looked like a new bracelet on her wrist. At 8:42 p.m., Stephen returned to their table with the leather check folder. Kevin reached into his wallet with the confidence of a man who'd done this many times before and pulled out my silver credit card like it belonged to him. 3 minutes later, Stephen was back at their table, his body language completely different. I could see him explaining something, his hands making small, apologetic gestures. Kevin's face went through a quick transformation from confident to confused to genuinely angry. Jessica started digging frantically through her purse. Nancy looked uncomfortable, suddenly very interested in her water glass. Carl was studying the ceiling, like it might offer solutions to whatever problem had just landed on their table. That's when I stood up and walked over. Well, I said, keeping my voice calm and steady, "Since dinner appears to be on me tonight, I thought I might join you all." The silence that followed was something you could cut with a knife. Jessica's face went white, then flushed red, then white again. Kevin's mouth actually fell open. Carl cleared his throat awkwardly while Nancy fidgeted with her napkin. I pulled out the manila folder Tony had given me and placed it squarely in the center of their table, right between the wine glasses and the remains of their appetizers. "These," I said, tapping the folder with my finger, "are copies of every charge you've made to my emergency credit card over the past 10 weeks. $4,127 worth of fine dining while you've been telling me you can't afford to visit your old man." Jessica found her voice first, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Dad, I can explain this." "No," I said, holding up my hand, "you really can't. Because I've got it all documented right here. October 8th, dinner for $445. That was the night you told me Benjamin had a fever and you couldn't make our dinner." I opened the folder and pulled out a specific receipt. October 15th Sunday brunch with champagne service, $312. Same day you called and said you were too exhausted from a sleepless night to drive over and see me. Kevin tried to interrupt. "Mr. Coleman, there's been some kind of misunderstanding, the only misunderstanding," I said. looking him straight in the eye, was mine. Thinking that emergency credit card was for groceries and utilities when Jessica got divorced 2 years ago, not for playing big shot with your parents. Nancy spoke up, her voice shaky. Harold, we had absolutely no idea about any of this. I believe you, I said, and meant it, because they made sure you didn't know. They wanted you to think they were doing well financially, that Kevin could afford to treat his parents to expensive dinners. All while Jessica was calling me asking for help with her car payment. I sat down in the empty chair at their table without being invited. The waiter, Stephen, was standing nearby looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Stephen, I called out, what's tonight's damage? 427, sir, he replied, clearly uncomfortable but maintaining his professionalism. Perfect. Split that check 4 ways. Everyone pays for their own meal. The look Kevin gave me could have melted steel. That's completely unreasonable. No, I said, what's unreasonable is a 34-year-old man using his father-in-law's credit card to impress his parents. What's unreasonable is my daughter lying to my face for 10 weeks while burning through money I earned with 40 years of honest construction work. Carl pulled out his wallet without saying a word. These seemed like decent people who'd been unknowingly part of a con game. Nancy did the same, her face flushed with embarrassment. Dad, please, Jessica whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. People are staring. Good, I said. Maybe they should see what happens when someone bites the hand that's been feeding them. Kevin was fumbling with his wallet, counting bills with shaking hands. I could tell he didn't have enough cash to cover his portion of a $427 dinner. Problem there, Kevin? I asked. I'll have to use my credit card, he muttered. Not meeting my eyes. Your own credit card. I hope, not another one of mine you've got stashed somewhere. Stephen handled the whole situation professionally, splitting the bill 4 ways and processing each payment separately. When he handed Kevin his receipt to sign, I noticed the young man's signature was barely legible. His hand was shaking so badly. After everyone had settled their portion, I stood up from the table. Jessica, we need to have a serious conversation, but not here and not tonight. You need to think long and hard about what you've done, and I need to figure out what comes next. I looked at Carl and Nancy, who were sitting there looking like they'd been hit by a freight train. I apologize that you folks got caught up in this mess. You seem like decent people who didn't deserve to be part of someone else's lie. Nancy spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Harold, we're staying at the Marriott downtown through Sunday. Room 314. I think we should talk, just the 2 of us, if you're willing. I nodded. I'd appreciate that, Nancy. As I walked away from that table, I could hear Kevin's voice, low and angry, hissing something at Jessica. I heard Carl telling his son to keep his voice down, and I heard Jessica crying softly, but I didn't turn around. The drive home took me past the old construction sites where I'd spent most of my working life. 40 years of getting up at 5 a.m., working in all kinds of weather, building things that lasted. Every dollar in my bank account came from honest work, from sweat and skill, and showing up when I said I would. And my own daughter had been treating it like play money. When I got to my house, the same house where Mary and I had raised Jessica, I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time before going inside. The porch light was on just like always. Mary used to say a house should welcome you home even when you're the only one living there. Inside, I spread those receipts across my kitchen table like evidence in a crime scene, because that's exactly what it was, a crime against trust, against everything Mary and I had tried to teach our daughter about integrity and respect. October 8th, 445 minus lobster tail for 4 premium wine selection, creme brulee all around. The same night Jessica had called me, sniffling, saying Benjamin had a 102-degree fever and she couldn't leave him to have dinner with his grandpa. October 15th, 3/4/12 minus Sunday champagne brunch with fresh crab Benedict and mimosas. The same day she'd texted that she was too exhausted from being up all night with a teething baby to drive the 20 minutes to see me. November 2nd, 3/8/9 minus Wagyu beef dinner with Kevin's parents, complete with a $80 bottle of wine that I recognized from the wine list. The same weekend I'd called to invite them over for a backyard barbecue, and she'd said they couldn't afford the gas money for the trip. Each receipt was a small betrayal, but together they painted a picture that made my chest feel tight. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect, about honesty, about the values Mary and I thought we'd instilled in our daughter. My phone started buzzing around 10 p.m. Text after text from Jessica. Dad, please call me. I can explain everything. You don't understand the whole situation. I never meant for this to happen. Please don't cut us out of your life. I turned the phone face down on the counter and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept thinking about the last conversation I'd had with Mary before she passed. We'd been talking about Jessica, how proud we were that she was getting back on her feet after her divorce, how she was working hard to provide for Benjamin. She's got good values, Hank, Mary had said. Holding my hand in that hospital bed, we raised her right. Trust in that. Trust. That word felt hollow now. Saturday morning, I drove over to see my old construction buddy and lawyer, George Wright. George had worked alongside me for 20 years before he decided to go to law school in his 40s. If anyone would give me straight talk about this situation, it was George. His office was in a modest building downtown, the kind of place that serves working folks, not corporate executives. George looked exactly like what he was, a former construction worker who'd gotten an education later in life. Big hands, weathered face, but sharp eyes that didn't miss much. Credit card fraud, he said after I'd laid out the whole story. That's what this is from a legal standpoint. She had authorization to use the card for emergencies related to her divorce situation, not for entertainment purposes. What are my options here, George? Legally, you could press charges, the amounts involved make it a felony. But Hank, before you go down that road, you need to think about what you really want to accomplish here. I leaned back in the metal chair, thinking, I want my daughter to understand that actions have consequences. I want her to respect me enough to tell me the truth, and I want to make sure this never happens again. Then maybe we start with a formal letter of demand. Give her 30 days to make this right, with clear consequences if she doesn't. Sometimes people need to see things in black and white legal language before they understand how serious the situation really is. George was right. I'd spent my whole career solving problems, methodically diagnose the issue, gather the right tools, fix it properly the first time. This was just another kind of problem that needed the same approach. That afternoon, I met Nancy Foster at a coffee shop downtown. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. Nancy looked like she'd aged 5 years since Thursday night. Harold, thank you for agreeing to meet with me, she said as I sat down. I needed to apologize face to face. Nancy, you don't owe me any apology. You didn't know what was happening. She shook her head, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. But I should have known. Carl and I have been wondering how Kevin could afford to take us to such expensive places. We thought maybe he'd gotten that promotion he'd been talking about. What promotion? He told us he was in line for a management position at his marketing firm. Said the company was expanding and he was going to be heading up a new division. Nancy's voice got quieter. Harold, Kevin lost his job 8 months ago. That hit me like a punch to the gut. 8 months. That meant he'd been unemployed since before Mary's anniversary, since before Benjamin's birthday party where Kevin had showed up wearing that expensive watch and talking about his latest business deals. Jessica knows she has to. They've been living off unemployment benefits and whatever she makes from her part-time graphic design work. That can't be much. Nancy pulled a tissue from her purse. Carl and I feel like such fools. We've been bragging to our friends about how well our son was doing, how generous he was taking us to all these nice restaurants. I thought about all the times Jessica had turned down my invitations over the past months. Can't afford a babysitter, Dad. Money's really tight this month. Kevin's working late again, maybe next weekend. Meanwhile, she was spending my money to maintain an illusion for Kevin's parents. Nancy, what are you and Carl going to do? We're flying home tomorrow. We need to have a long conversation with Kevin about honesty and pride. And Harold, we want to pay you back for our portions of those dinners. We had no business enjoying meals that someone else was paying for without their knowledge. I liked Nancy Foster. She had integrity, something that seemed to be in short supply in her son's family. Sunday evening, Jessica showed up at my door. She looked terrible. Red eyes, no makeup, wearing an old sweater I remembered from her college days. This wasn't the polished woman I'd seen at Romano's throwing around my money. Dad, can we talk? I let her in and we sat at the kitchen table where those receipts were still spread out like evidence in a courtroom. I know what you're going to say, she started. Do you? Because I'm not sure you understand what you've done here, Jessica. She wiped her nose with a tissue. I messed up. I know I messed up. You didn't mess up. You made a deliberate choice to deceive me, repeatedly, for over 2 months. There's a difference. I picked up one of the receipts, November 12th, $456. Wine tasting dinner with Kevin's parents. That same week you called me asking if I could help with Benjamin's daycare payment because you were short $200. Her face crumpled. Dad, I know how it looks. How it looks, Jessica. I know how it is. You've been using me as your personal ATM while lying to my face about your financial situation. She started crying harder. Kevin didn't want anyone to know he lost his job. He was so embarrassed, especially in front of his parents. They've always had money, Dad. They expect a certain lifestyle. So you decided to provide that lifestyle with money you stole from me. I didn't steal it. You gave me that card for emergencies. I stood up from the table, feeling my temper start to rise for the first time since this whole thing started. Emergency groceries, Jessica. Emergency car repairs. Emergency medical bills. Not emergency lobster dinners to impress your in-laws. She was quiet for a long time, just crying into her tissue. Finally, she looked up at me. I told myself it was temporary, that Kevin would find another job soon and we'd pay you back before you ever knew. But he didn't find a job, did he? And instead of coming to me for help, instead of being honest about your situation, you just kept digging the hole deeper. I sat back down and pushed the folder of receipts toward her. Look at these dates, Jessica. Really look at them. Every single one corresponds to a time when you told me you couldn't see me because of money problems or Benjamin being sick or Kevin working late. She flipped through the receipts, her hands shaking. October 22nd, she whispered. That was the night I told you Benjamin had an ear infection. He was fine, wasn't he? She nodded, not looking up. November 5th, you said Kevin had to work late and you didn't want to drive alone in the dark. We were celebrating Carl's birthday. Her voice was barely audible with my money. While I sat at home eating a frozen dinner, thinking my daughter was too busy or too broke to spend time with her father, the silence stretched between us. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, the same clock Mary and I had bought when we first moved into this house, back when Jessica was just a little girl who thought her daddy could fix anything. What happens now? She finally asked. I pulled out the letter George Wright had helped me draft. You're going to read this. It's a formal demand for repayment of the $4,127 you've charged to my card without authorization. You have 30 days to come up with a payment plan. Her eyes went wide. Dad, we don't have that kind of money. Then you'll figure it out. Sell the jewelry Kevin bought you with my card. Sell that silk blouse you were wearing Thursday night. Get a second job. I don't care how you do it, but you're going to pay back every cent. And if I can't, then I file a police report for credit card fraud and let the legal system handle it. She stared at the letter like it was written in a foreign language. You'd really have me arrested? Jessica, I've spent 40 years earning the money you blew through in 10 weeks. I got up at 5 a.m. in all kinds of weather, worked with my hands until they bled sometimes, all to provide for my family, and you treated it like it was monopoly money. I leaned forward, making sure she was looking at me, but this isn't really about the money. This is about respect. This is about honesty. This is about the values your mother and I tried to teach you. She was crying again, but these tears looked different. Not the manipulative crying I'd seen from her since she was a teenager trying to get out of trouble, but genuine remorse. I miss her so much, Dad. Mom would be so ashamed of me. Yeah, I said quietly, she would be. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Jessica and Kevin sold their expensive furniture, the jewelry, anything they could turn into cash. I heard through Nancy that they'd moved out of their upscale apartment into a modest townhouse about 10 minutes from my place. Kevin found work at a local insurance office. Not the high-paying marketing job he'd lost, but honest work with a steady paycheck. Jessica started taking on more freelance design projects, working nights after Benjamin went to bed. Every Friday, one of them would stop by my house with a check, $200, $300, sometimes only $150 when things were really tight. It wasn't about the amount, it was about them taking responsibility. The first check Jessica brought me, her hands were shaking as she handed it over. Dad, this is $250. I know it's not much, but it's a start, I said, taking the check. How's Benjamin handling the move? Better than we are, honestly. Kids are resilient. He likes being closer to you. That was true. With their new place just down the road, Benjamin had started spending Saturday mornings with me, learning basic tool skills in my garage workshop. The boy had good hands and genuine curiosity about how things worked. One Saturday morning, about 6 weeks after the Romanos incident, Benjamin was helping me wire a new outlet in the garage when Jessica showed up with coffee for both of us. Mind if I watch? She asked. I nodded toward an old lawn chair. Your coffee's getting cold. She sat down and watched as I showed Benjamin how to strip wire insulation. The boy was concentrating so hard his tongue was sticking out, just like Jessica used to do when she was learning to tie her shoes. Dad, Jessica said quietly, I want you to know that Kevin and I are going to marriage counseling and financial counseling. I kept my attention on Benjamin's work, but I was listening. Kevin's therapist said his problem isn't really about unemployment. It's about pride and image. He was so afraid of looking like a failure that he created an even bigger failure. What do you think? I asked, helping Benjamin twist the wire nuts. I think I was so busy trying to be the wife Kevin wanted me to be that I forgot about being the daughter you raised me to be. I looked up at her then. She was wearing jeans and an old flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked more like the Jessica I remembered from before her marriage, before she got caught up in trying to impress people. Good job, buddy, I told Benjamin as he successfully completed the wire connection. You're getting the hang of this, Grandpa. Can we work on the birdhouse next? Sure thing. Go wash your hands first. After Benjamin ran inside, Jessica and I sat quietly for a moment. I've been thinking about what Mom would say about all this, she said. and she'd tell me that making mistakes doesn't define you, how you handle the consequences does. I nodded. Mary had always been the wise one in our family. 3 months later, Jessica brought me an envelope different from the usual weekly payments. "What's this?" I asked the final payment. $4,127 paid in full. I looked at the check, then at her. She looked tired but proud. Thinner than she'd been before, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there in years. Self-respect, maybe. "Jessica, I want you to keep this check." Her eyes went wide. "Dad, what?" "Put it in Benjamin's college fund. You've already paid me back in ways that matter more than money." She started crying then, but these weren't the manipulative tears I'd seen from her over the years. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a burden finally lifted. That weekend, Jessica invited me over for dinner at their new place. Nothing fancy, just pot roast and mashed potatoes, but she'd cooked it herself. Kevin was there, and while things were still somewhat awkward between us, he looked me in the eye when he shook my hand. "Mr. Coleman, I owe you an apology. Not just for the money, but for the disrespect. You deserved better from both of us." I could tell the words weren't easy for him to say, but he said them anyway. "We all make mistakes, Kevin. What matters is what we learn from them." Dinner was simple but good. Kevin talked about his new job, how it wasn't as prestigious as his old one, but how he was learning to find satisfaction in honest work. Jessica showed me some of her recent design projects, small local businesses that couldn't pay much but appreciated her creativity. After we ate, Benjamin climbed onto my lap with a picture book. "Grandpa, will you read to me?" As I read about construction vehicles, Benjamin's current obsession, Jessica and Kevin cleaned up the kitchen together. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of people who'd stopped trying to impress anyone and started focusing on building something real. Later, as I was getting ready to leave, Jessica walked me to the door. "Dad, I know things can't just go back to how they were before." "No," I said, "they can't. But maybe they can be better." She hugged me then, and it felt like hugging my daughter again, not the stranger she'd become during those months of deception. "I love you, Dad, and I respect you. I should have said that more often." "I love you too, sweetheart, and I'm proud of how you're handling all this." As I drove home that night, I thought about Mary and what she would have made of everything that had happened. She always believed that people could change, that mistakes could become lessons if you let them. 6 months later, Jessica and Kevin hosted a small birthday party for Benjamin at their place. Nothing elaborate, just family and a few of Benjamin's little friends. When it came time to pay for the pizza delivery, Jessica reached for her own wallet without hesitation. Kevin had been promoted to assistant manager at his insurance office. Jessica's freelance business was growing steadily. They were making it on their own without lies, without my credit card, without trying to be something they weren't. That night, as Benjamin showed me his birthday presents, mostly educational toys and books instead of expensive gadgets, I realized we'd all learned something important. Love without respect is just enabling. But love with respect, that's family. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you ever had to set hard boundaries with someone you love? Let me know in the comments below. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is refusing to enable their worst behaviors, even when saying no feels like you're pushing them away. Real family isn't built on who can provide the most money, but on who has the courage to demand honesty and the wisdom to forgive when that honesty finally comes.